Hello, my name is Captain Dan Hanley. I currently serve as Director and International Public Spokesperson for a global grassroots effort called 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers, whose website is at 911pilots.org and YouTube channel at 911 Pilots if you'd like additional information on us. But basically, the purpose of our organization is to show that there were no Muslim hijackers at the controls of the 9/11 aircraft, but that the aircraft were electronically hijacked through employment of a system called the uninterruptible autopilot that enables remote source to take complete control of the aircraft's autopilot and flight management computers and fly the aircraft to its designated target. Now, once this system is engaged, the pilots can no longer disconnect it. And if you disbelieve that a large commercial jet aircraft could be electronic hijacked, I suggest you go to that website at 911pilots.org and go to the remote control page on the drop-down menu, and you will see that it is entirely possible for them to be remotely controlled. So today I have with me Mark Gaffney. He lives in Chiloquin, Oregon. He's the author of several books, two of them, well, three actually, if you consider the second edition of book, but three books on 9/11. The first book that he wrote was in 2008, and it was called The 9/11 Mystery Plane and the Vanishing of America with another 9/11 truther, David Ray Griffin. And that's about the E-4B that was seen circling over Washington, D.C. on 9/11. But I'll let Mark talk about that if he'd like to. And the second book he wrote was in 2012, and it's called Black 9/11, Money, Motive, and Technology. And the third was the second addition to that book, and it's called Black 9/11, How Cutting Edge Technology Was Used Against the American People on September 11th, 2001. I'm embarrassed to admit, Mark, I didn't read your books, but they all sound very interesting. Mark, thanks for doing this interview, and maybe you'd like to tell people a little bit more about yourself, how you got into the truth movement and became an author.
Thank you, Dan. Glad to be with you. Let me just say up front that I'm very pleased that somebody's picking up this issue, even if it is late in the game, and running with it, because there is no statute of limitations for murder, and that's what we have here. We have mass murder of Americans to further a foreign policy agenda, in my opinion. So I'm glad you're doing this, what you're doing. I got into this in 2006. I was late coming to the issue. Somebody passed me a copy of David Ray Griffin's book, New Pearl Harbor, and that got me asking questions. And then I heard about this. I was contacted by a researcher who had been looking into these E-4Bs flying over Washington during the attacks, and he got into the archives of one of the networks. I'm trying to remember if it was CNN. I think it was CNN, and actually got the footage that had been stored there, and I got access to it, and he shared that with me, and that really got me started on the first book. And then I found out so much I couldn't include it all in one book, so I did a second book, a follow-up book, Black 9/11, and then investigated some of these other related issues. And that included Hani Hanjour, and who supposedly, we're told, flew Flight 77 now into the Pentagon. Now, I had access to the 9/11 radar data because a colleague, John Farmer, acquired the 9/11 raids radar data from the government through a Freedom of Information Act request, and made that available to me. So that was extremely helpful in piecing together the story that I learned, what I found out.
Okay.
And we had Flight 77. I just want to say up front here, I try to avoid the Pentagon strike because it's so divisive, but we had Flight 77 on radar the entire time from Dulles until it hit the Pentagon. So the photographs of the Pentagon, unfortunately, the ones that show the big hole in the side of the building never got much attention. All we saw was this photograph of a little tiny hole, and people thought it was a missile hole. But there was plenty of, it was a big area that got hit, and definitely large enough to, accommodate a flight, a Boeing 757. So I have no doubt about that. I just want to say that and get that out of the way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, the Hani Hanjour issue is vital. I don't question that 77 hit the Pentagon, but Hani Hanjour was not able to fly that plane. And the research I did, still, no one has refuted it. It's still valid today.
Yeah.
Research I did back then.
Oh, I'd like to just mention, because a lot of people may not be familiar with who specifically Hani Hanjour was, but he was a 29-year-old Saudi Arabian who came to the States in the 90s to train, went back to Saudi Arabia, and then returned before 9/11 to try to continue his training. But basically, as Mark mentioned, he took off from Washington Dulles Airport heading west, and got to cruising altitude, made a U-turn, a 180-degree turn back into Washington, D.C., and started his descent. At around 7,000 feet, he commenced this 330-degree descending, accelerating corkscrew turn to arrive precisely at the surface without skidding the surface at 500 knots to strike the Office of Naval Intelligence on his first try. Now, we're going to get into Hani Hanjour's experience or lack thereof. Now, this very experiment, there's another grassroots organization called Pilots for 9/11 Truth. They rented some simulator time and put highly experienced pilots in the seat. And when they tried to accomplish this maneuver, they crashed the simulator, and yet we're led to believe by the 9/11 Commission that this novice pilot was able to accomplish it on his first attempt. Mark did a research article, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but this July 2008 global research article was actually a chapter from your book, is that correct?
That became a chapter in the 2012
Oh, okay.
book, yes.
I got it backwards then. Okay. Anyhow,
The article came first.
Right. Okay. I don't know how I stumbled across it, but it was a real eye opener for me when I read the information contained therein. And it's so important that we, on our 911pilots.org website, we've placed it in 2 locations. If you go to the top of the page, there's a tab called articles, and you click on that and you drop down and it'll say Gaffney. Just go to that. We've got it where you can, it's PDF, you can download it or print a copy of it, but it's about an 8-page article and well worth reading. And the other place we put it was on the hijackers page on the drop-down menu there. But the title is very descriptive and revealing on what we're going to be talking about here. And that is, quote, how the FBI and the 9/11 Commission suppressed key evidence about Hani Hanjour, the alleged hijacker of American 77. Now, you say in the article, in August 2004, the 9/11 Commission had completed its work and they transferred records to the National Archives, and it was kept there under lock and key for 4.5 years. And then in 2007, a small fraction of these documents were released. And the article, your article basically is all about the information that was released by Hani Hanjour, about Hani Hanjour in that year. So it basically says he was a perpetual novice. Now, I know we're going back years on you here, Mark, and I don't know how much you recall about his training, but you said in the article that he was a perpetual novice, and he dropped out of his first school at Sierra Academy of Aeronautics just after attending only a few classes. And then he enrolled in Cockpit Resource Management, which is a flight school in Scottsdale, Arizona, and his performance was described as being less than adequate, and the owner of the school described Hanjour as a weak student who was wasting our resources. Those were quotes. So we've got the page I mentioned to you on hijackers on our website. And I just want to read some notes to you about that he was quoted, that were quoted in major mainstream news outlets. But Hani Hanjour trained mainly in light prop airplanes like a single engine Cessna, and had never flown a jet aircraft in his life in flight, to the best of our knowledge. In January 2001, Arizona flight tech school managers reported him to the FAA at least 5 times because his English was inadequate for a commercial license. It took him 5 hours to complete an oral exam meant to last 2 hours. Peggy Chevette, manager at the school, said he failed English classes with a 0.26 grade point average, and the jet tech manager said he could not fly at all. That was a quote. Now, according to the 9/11 Commission, Hanjour began his training in earnest, but in reality, while in cockpit resource management, he rarely finished his coursework required to get his certificate to be able to fly even a single engine aircraft. I've got 3 newspaper articles here and one TV report. The New York Times reported that, quote, he was a lackadaisical student who often cut classes and never displayed the passion so common among budding commercial airline pilots. ABC News reported that when he returned to cockpit resource management, quote, he was trying for his pilot's license, but according to one of his instructors, he was a very poor student who skipped homework and missed classes. The school's attorney said that when Hanjour reapplied again later in 2000, when he returned from Saudi Arabia, we declined to provide him training because we didn't think he was a good enough student when he was there in 96 and 97. The school's owner described him as a weak student, and he said one of the first accomplishments of someone in a flight school was to be able to fly an airplane without an instructor. And finally, the Chicago Tribune reported that while he was at cockpit resource management, quote, he was left with an instructor was left with the impression that Hanjour was unimpressive. He was making weak progress. So all in all, you see there from multiple reports, he was a very poor student and apparently had some learning disabilities. But all this was reported in the mainstream media and was out there, but none of it made it into the 9/11 Commission final report, and we'll see why here in a bit. But Peggy Chevette, as we mentioned before, she mentioned Fox News, quote, I couldn't believe that he had a license of any kind with the skills that he had. Now, Mark, maybe you could expound on this, but he did in fact have some simulator time in a 737.
Well, yes, and actually, you're the pilot. I should be asking you, would a simulator time in a 737 qualify somebody to fly a 757?
Not at those speeds. They're all right. To the best of our knowledge, they had never seen the inside of a Boeing 757 or 767 aircraft. The 757 was American 77 that hit the Pentagon, and it's absurd to believe that this pilot could have flown this aircraft. And what we do on our website, we do a photo analysis of a Cessna 172. It's on the aircraft page, which was their primary training aircraft with that of a 757. And you see the vast differences. You're talking about a 1-ton airplane compared to a 100-ton airplane, one that does 100 knots compared to one that supposedly did 500 knots, which is questionable that it could achieve that speed. An airplane that's 27 feet long compared to a 160-foot long airplane. And it's absurd when you look at the cockpit differences between a Cessna 172 and a Boeing 757, the vast differences in the instrumentation and the wealth of information that is available on various screens, computer displays, et cetera, on the 757 aircraft. So the fact that he had 737 simulator, and that's a big question, and I haven't been able to research it, whether it was in a 737-200, which was your older cockpit airplanes, or a 737-300 or above that had the glass cockpit. But at any rate, no flight time in any jet aircraft. And his instructor that trained him on the simulator said he, Hanjour, will need much more experience flying smaller aircraft before he's ready to master large jets. So all of this was not mentioned in the final 9/11 Commission report. While he was at Pan Am dissolved Jet Tech shortly after 9/11, they owned it, okay? But a former employee who knew Hanjour expressed amazement that Hanjour, could have flown into the Pentagon because he could not fly at all. Now, Mark, are you familiar with the scouting flights in 2001, just 5 months before 9/11 that Hanjour wanted to do up in New Jersey?
I am more familiar. I know he did a flight up there in New Jersey, but I spent more time investigating his visit to Freeway Airport, which was in August, just before the attacks.
Right. That was just
actually contacted the manager there, Marcel Bernard, and he confirmed to me that the story I had read in the paper about how Hanjour had flunked was accurate. One of his pilots, two of his pilots actually, flew with Hanjour, and I talked with one of them, Ben Connor. I looked him up also, and he also confirmed that Hanjour could not fly. And when he got back, he recommended to his boss, Marcel Bernard, that they not rent him a plane. And this is the same pattern that happened in New Jersey that was repeated again in Maryland, just outside of the Washington area.
Right. In New Jersey, just 4 months before, going back just for a minute, Hanjour rented a plane, but he had an instructor with him and he wanted to do a Hudson tour, they claimed, okay? But the next day when Hanjour came back, he wanted to rent an airplane again, and the instructor wouldn't allow it because of Hanjour's poor piloting skills. But the very incident you're talking about, Mark, was exactly 1 month prior to 9/11. He shows up at Freeway Airport to rent an airplane. Now, when you're a pilot and you show up out of the clear blue at an airport, they want to do an evaluation flight to make sure you're capable of flying. And that's what Hani Hanjour on three flights on 2 days went up with these instructors that Mark mentioned, Sherry Baxter and Ben Connor. And they both came back independently and told Marcel Bernard, the chief flight instructor, he can't fly. Don't rent him an airplane. And I personally spoke with Marcel Bernard last month, and he really didn't want to talk about it. He said it was past history and it wasn't going to go anywhere, and he was really tight-lipped about it. But he did acknowledge that they did come to him and talk to him, and I thought he was the one that had flown with him, but he had told me that he didn't fly with them. He just refused the airplane. Now, we're going to talk, why did the 9/11 Commission ignore all these open source accounts of what happened, okay? Collaboratively indicating that Hanjour would have been lost in the cockpit of 57 and was barely able to qualify a single engine Cessna. Well, we're going to find out here, because another important point is the 9/11 Commission fails to report the negative evaluation by Hanjour, the jet tech flight instructor, by the jet tech flight instructor. But anyhow.
Yes, and they these pilots and instructors at Freeway Airport, Ben Connor and what was her name, Baxter?
Sherry Baxter, right?
They both expected to be interviewed by the 9/11 Commission.
Right.
They should have been interviewed. Neither one was, and they were surprised. But the pattern you see over and over again, all these different experts or people who met Hani Hanjour had the same impression. And in fact, if you just consider the guy's motivation, he never even wanted to be a pilot. According to one source, he was going to be happy if he could just be a flight attendant. Supposedly, his brother persuaded him to, aim higher. And the people that knew Hani said that he wasn't very motivated. You know, he was, like you said, lackadaisical guy, kind of an happy-go-lucky, you know, guy who really didn't take life that seriously. And
Right.
he wasn't very smart. He just wasn't that intelligent or capable.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
the people who met him, they
up you're breaking.
all said he does not have what it takes to be a pilot. You know, he just didn't have it.
Right. Well, the FBI file that you mentioned in the article says that there's not one scintilla of evidence that Hanjour ever trained in the 757. And it also failed to mention jet tech, as we mentioned before, but it grossly mischaracterizes what happened at the Freeway Airport, in that it says that Hanjour received instruction from Sherry Baxter and Ben Connor, and that isn't true. It was just an evaluation fight. And there were no lessons given. So we can see that the FBI failed to accurately report any of these, any of this information to the 9/11 Commission. So it's a total suppression of valuable evidence by the FBI and the 9/11 Commission. And this is curious to note that in August 2001, he actually failed a written test for his driver's license at the Virginia Division of Motor Vehicles. So, Mark, we talked about Hani now, and we talked about Marcel Bernard and the two flight instructors. So why don't you share with everybody why the 9/11 Commission, who was Eddie Shalev is what I'm going to ask you. 3 days later, where did Hani Hanjour go? And what happened if you're familiar with Eddie Shalev?
Yes, well, Eddie Shalev was the one source that the 9/11 Commission, you know, regarded as valid, and all these other reports that were never even mentioned were dropped. And because Eddie Shalev was the one instructor who stated that Hani could fly, that he was a decent pilot, you know, that he
Right.
would have been able to do what the 9/11 Commission claims that he did. And so the question is, who is this guy, Eddie Shalev? Well, he's a mystery man because he basically dropped out of sight. He was working at a Gaithersburg, Maryland company, Congressional Air Charters, very briefly, though, only for about a month before 9/11, and then shortly after he disappears. And this Congressional Air Charters, you know, was, you know, also the actual this outfit ceased to exist shortly after 9/11. So the question, many questions arise over this. Was this just a front set up for the specific purpose of creating a false story, so that a false narrative, so that whoever was going to investigate later would have a shred of evidence indicating that Hani Hanjour could indeed fly, when we know that he couldn't?
Right.
And apparently the 9/11 Commission bought that lone witness supporting Hani Hanjour and threw out all that other evidence, this, you know, overwhelming amount of evidence. So it's just, that's why I can't remember all the details over these years, because there's so much of it.
Right.
So
right.
many people have testified that Hani couldn't fly, and yet the 9/11 Commission ignored all of that, and they went with Eddie Shalev's testimony that he was a pilot, that he could fly. So the question is, who is this Eddie Shalev? And we never did locate this guy. He dropped out of sight, and we believe that he ended up back in Israel, because Eddie Shalev was a member of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and for, you know, we don't know. Nobody really knows. You know, nobody can answer the question, the key questions, because nobody has ever been able to get a hold of this guy.
Yeah.
So we were left with a loose end there and all these unanswered questions, because this guy disappeared.
So in a nutshell, you've got here Hani Hanjour denied rental from the Freeway Airport after flying with two instructors. Okay. So 3 days later, he goes down to Congressional Air Charter, asks to rent an airplane, goes up with his instructor, an Israeli who we don't know nothing about, who came back and said Hani Hanjour was a good pilot. Now, there was a 9/11 commission staffer. I got his name here. His name was Quinn John Tam, and he interviewed Shalev. And Shalev said that he was a good pilot. He also interviewed Connor and Baxter. So he had both sides of the story, and yet he ignored three qualified instructor pilots who said he couldn't fly an airplane, and chose the testimony of this Israeli that we know nothing about, that the 9/11 Commission didn't vet. And this appeared as a footnote, a end note in the 9/11 Commission's final report. So our
That's
title
right. And Eddie Shalev, his name only appeared one time in a footnote.
it's amazing.
That's all the information he gave us.
And that was so hypercritical because all this information shows that Hani Hanjour was not a good air pilot and couldn't fly an airplane at all, never mind a 757 performing that incredible maneuver at that speed. So read this article. Mark, you wanted to talk about United 93, which we really don't cover on our website, but you said you'd like to mention something about it.
Yes, and let me just, before we go there, let me just mention another detail that's really important about Congressional Air Charters, this company where Eddie Shalev worked in Gaithersburg, Maryland. There was another airport there where he worked. It turned out that I found out that that the man who ran this, actually this was thanks to Chris Boland, he found this out, that the Congressional Air Charters was actually run by a guy with a criminal record. His name is Monty Lilly, and he had been convicted of, let's see, he had a criminal background, a convicted felon. I'm not sure what the details of his crime. He had been sentenced to 30 months in prison, however, in order to pay $3 million in restitution. Oh, after embezzling. This guy was an embezzler.
Wow.
And he was running congressional charters. So it really raises a lot of questions about what is this, what was going on here, because it's common for intelligence agencies to work with these kind of guys,
right,
criminals, drug dealers, and so on. People with shady pasts end up a lot of times working with the CIA or other as cutouts or other intelligence agencies like the Mossad, for example.
Right.
So this was another detail that that raises questions.
So that
let's talk about Flight 93.
Okay, sure. Let me just say one thing, Mark. 9/11 pilot whistleblowers. The basic statements we're making is the hijackers couldn't have flown, and there's a system called the uninterruptible autopilot that could have flown the profile. So we really just cover the two planes that hit the trade centers and the Pentagon profile, and don't get into whether a missile hit the Pentagon or whether there was really an airplane that hit the Twin Towers or whatever. But we don't even address Flight 93. But go ahead, Mark. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Well, I mean, I think that's a smart approach to just stay very focused on the issues that you want to concentrate on.
Right.
But the reason I wanted to talk about Flight 93 is because we have new information, and that I think it actually supports the remote access and remote control theory. So it fits very consistent with it. And I learned about this last September 11th at a September 11th event, let me put it that way, in Oakland. They have an annual conference down there, and I went down last September for it. And Ken Jenkins gave a presentation about Flight 93. He's a 9/11 researcher, and he's been working, he's been working on the issue for many years. I've known him for quite a while. He gave a presentation about Flight 93 that impressed me very much because he had new information. He presented an animation based on the Flight 93's flight data recorder, which was recovered on site there near Shanksville. And that was very persuasive. And this was new information for me. And the information in that flight data recorder and the voice, what's the name of that? The voice
recorder.
What's the technical? Yes, the voice recorder indicated that it may very well be that the hijackers were on that plane and flying that plane, and that a revolt did occur of the passengers who apparently tried to break into the cockpit. And at that moment, that is when, the plane does all this jumping around in the sky, and actually was flying upside down just before the crash, and then went straight down into the ground. Now, that kind of a trajectory could explain the debris field at Shanksville and the crash site there. That's the one trajectory that could account for what was, the absence of debris and so on. And the reason that I think it's important, and I think that this actually renders my chapter on Flight 93 a little bit dated at this point, because if those hijackers were on that plane and flying it, I mean, it confirms what we're saying about these Arab hijackers as being incompetent pilots, because these guys were wandering all around the Pennsylvania countryside. They couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. They would have been lucky to actually find the Washington, D.C. area, let alone hit anything.
Right, exactly.
This indirectly supports the remote control theory, because what I believe happened is that 3 of the 4 planes were flown with remote control. And for some reason, Flight 93, something happened, something went wrong. They were not able to actually get control over that flight controller. So if they had gotten control, then they would have locked out those hijackers, and they would have uploaded a different flight plan and would have flown that plane remotely to wherever they wanted to, target they wanted to hit. That's apparently, in my opinion, what happened to the other 3 planes. And if the alleged hijackers were actually on those other 3 planes, they got locked out. The jackers were jacked, and those guys did not have control. They lost control, and they were victims just like the passengers and the crew.
Exactly.
So that's my view of it.
Exactly. And for people that want additional information on the research and development that went into this uninterruptible autopilot in the 1990s, prior to 9/11, I just interviewed Aidan Monahan, who's also a researcher that did a lot of Freedom of Information Act work to get the information he needed to write a book, the title escapes me right now. But anyhow, we've got both an article that he wrote under the articles tab of our website. And if you go to the videos tab, as this interview will be presented, it says Monahan, and you can listen to a 1-hour interview I did with Aidan last week on this very topic. But it's very revealing that the system was developed before 9/11. It does exist. And we allege that it was used on 9/11 because the navigation system on today's modern commercial jet aircraft is derived from cruise missile technology. It's extremely accurate. And yes, within a few meters, it could hit the targets it did. And it's amazing that all 3 airplanes, American 11 in the North Tower, United 175 in the South Tower, and American 77 in the Pentagon, on their first attempt, with these rookies supposedly at the control wheel, were able to precisely strike the target the way they did. It just didn't happen that way. Please go to our website and read it. But Mark, do you have any other comments you want to make? Any closing comments you want to make before we sign off here?
No, I just want to mention briefly that Aidan Monahan actually edited a section of my book where he presents this GPS research that he did about highways in the sky.
Yes.
And I detail my own research about the remote control in a separate chapter. So actually, the book presents two possible means of remote control that could have been used on 9/11.
Very good. From my end, we encourage you to go to our website. Again, that's 911pilots.org and read these articles by these two gentlemen that are very revealing. And also you might go to our YouTube channel at 911 Pilots. We got about 45 videos on there. A lot of them are interviews that we've done. So if you don't have anything else, Mark, thanks again for joining me on this interview and sharing your information with us and for all the
I
work
just
that
want to
you.
wish you well and keep up the good work, Dan.
Oh, thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. So me from Islamabad, Pakistan, and Mark Gaffney from Chentoquin, Oregon. I believe I pronounced that correctly. We're saying
Chiloquin.
Chiloquin. That's it. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Oh.